So I looked at all the readings trying to come up with a cohesive theme. I thought of the theology of replacement, or Christology of replacement, if you want. Let's start with the first reading in the Ten Commandments. When God gave Moses these 10 commandments, he said, think, if you obey these commandments and all the neighboring tribes see this and all of them hear these commands, they will know that you have a God that is beyond all measure. These commandments were to keep the Israelites. They were God's strength for them. I give you these laws, and they will keep you safe. It's not much later that Jesus comes, and he says, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the light. And it sounds very much like he is replacing the 10 commandments with himself. And in reality, yes, he is. But he's not saying they count for nothing. They had their place. They are a foundation upon which we all shall build. But there is more. Christ coming into this world adds a whole new dimension as to who we are and how we're called and what we are called to. And so, though it sounds like he's replacing the 10 Commandments, say, with the Beatitudes or with the law of love, he's not saying no to them. He's saying yes and more. We need that foundation of commandments. We need the foundation of law. Without law, no child can live. They need the boundaries that show them who they are, give them shape and form. And as they grow, as they get older, the situations change and get larger for them, and pretty soon they're able to try it for themselves. But they always need this law. We cannot abandon them and tell them simply love God. We need to give them strength through law. But Jesus did come, and he did replace it with the law of love. Now, if you look at the gospel today, this gospel is one of the very few that is repeated in all 4 gospels. It's very rare to find that. And in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all 3 of these have this scene at the very end of Jesus' life. When Jesus went to Jerusalem, in their account, it was the last time he went to Jerusalem, because then is when he was about to die. So it's in that context that the synoptic gospel writers place this scene. But John doesn't do that. John puts this in chapter 2. Chapter 2. He wants everyone to know that Jesus is coming as a substitute for the temple. He is more than just a man. He is God. And he will stand in place of the temple. And again, I remind you, when John was writing his gospel, the great heresy then, back then it had been that Jesus wasn't human. Now it's that Jesus isn't God. And so from the start, he wants people to know that. And to emphasize this more, go back to this story just before this one. Where, chapter 1 is his great introduction. Chapter 2 begins with Cana. And what happens at Cana? Jesus takes the water that was there for purification, the water that represented all of their laws as a symbol of law for them, and he replaced it with new wine. He replaced it with himself. And he moves from that replacement in Cana to this story in Jerusalem as he replaces the temple. God, Jesus, is replacing everything. And you can imagine how frightening that might be for the Jews at that time. Everything they knew was being turned upside down. Who is this man? Who does he think he is? And that's the question asked always in John. It's not what he did, but who is he? And he's saying, I am the Son of God. I am God. I can forgive sins. And then I'm going to show you, and the other gospel writers, almost immediately he moves to the Last Supper and then to his judgment and death and resurrection. And then they clearly see who this man was. It's not until he dies, say in Mark's gospel, that anybody professes him as the Lord Jesus Christ. It's the centurion who watches him die. He looks at him and says, this truly is the Son of God. That's the first one for anyone to say that in Mark's gospel. Matthew and Luke are equally late in identifying who Jesus truly is. But John wants us to know right away, this is the Son of God. And this God is replacing what all those people knew with his life, with his love, with his grace. He's not going to leave them with just one moment of himself. He will leave them with his Spirit. He will give them the strength, the courage, the wisdom to be able to act out his life in their lives. And that's our challenge during these Lenten weeks, to try to imitate Christ, to hear those laws that are presented to us in the Old Testament, measure ourselves against them, then hear the Beatitudes, and measure ourselves against them, and then watch Christ climb that cross and die and rise, and measure ourselves against that.